What is going on, Chess YouTube? So in today's video, we're going back in time a little bit to look at one of the best games played between Magnus Carlsen and Gukesh D at the 2022 Speed Chess Championships. Alright, in the game we start knight f3, then d5, and then g3. Magnus heading for the King's Indian attack setup as he often does in these blitz games. Now here, Gukesh, obviously, he's got a million different options. You can go for an e6 based setup, a g6 based setup, or even c5 and knight c6 threatening e5. Instead, in the game, bishop g4 was played, and this is one of the top engine lines. The point being, you want to get the bishop outside the pawn chain, then go knight f6, e6, and so on, and continue developing. All right, now here, Magnus got many options, many ways to proceed. In the game, he goes for a very interesting choice. That is the move c4 immediately, opting not to go bishop g2, defending the knight on f3 with the bishop, instead the immediate c4, and this does give Gukesh the option of just trading on f3 immediately, damaging white's pawn structure. And who knows, maybe Magnus wanted that, maybe he wanted some sort of weird imbalanced game, and sure enough, here Gukesh, he does punish this mistake by Magnus. He takes on f3, bishop takes f3, then e takes f3, and now we do have, again, a very interesting pawn structure on the king side. If white does go bishop g2, the extra pawn on f3 will temporarily blunt the white light-squared bishop. All right, Gukesh, how does he want to proceed? Well, it turns out taking on c4 is a little bit dubious. Then white can just recapture with the bishop. Bishop takes c4, and despite, again, having that weird pawn structure on the king side, white is going to be doing just fine. He can go short castles, later king g2, and surprisingly, the king would defend those weakened light squares just fine. Now, instead, e6 and c6 are the best moves for black. In the game, Gukesh does go c6, bolstering the pawn on d5 in the spirit of the Slav opening. Now here, white again has a million different options, and the main options include queen to b3, b3, h4, d4, knight c3, and so on. In the game, queen b3 played by Magnus. And now the idea behind this move, you are putting immediate pressure on the pawn on b7. That does force out something from black to defend. Now, the strongest move here is just queen b6, defending with the queen, blocking that b7 pawn, and offering an exchange going into an endgame. And of course, Magnus is, just the GOAT at endgame, so I'm sure he wouldn't mind that scenario. But instead here, Gukesh, keeping the queens on the board, queen d7 was played. Now, this move is quite a bit weaker than queen b6, but I like it a lot more. It avoids those early queen trades, and it keeps the queens on the board for now. All right, Magnus, he continues, d4, gaining space. Then knight f6, knight c3, and e6, finally achieving the famous Slav pawn triangle in the center of the board. This pawn triangle can be achieved via many different openings: the Slav, the semi-Slav, the Karo-Khan, the London system, the Trompowsky, and even this knight f3, g3, bishop g4 opening. All right, now here, white. In this position, the main moves here are simply bishop e3 and bishop f4, developing that dark squared bishop. Now instead, Magnus, he plays kind of a crazy move here. h4, the alpha 0 move, pushing the h-pawn up the board. And what is the idea behind this move? Well, he's not threatening anything immediately, but in the future, h5, then h6 could be a dangerous idea, trying to attack the black king if it does castle, or even if it stays in the center of the board. All right, now here, Gukesh, bishop b7, bishop b3, and castles. So far, very typical stuff. And now here, Magnus has the option of going bishop d3, maybe even long castles or something else. Now, long castles here turns out is quite a bit weaker than the alternatives. It looks very attractive. You are making good use of the alpha 0 pawn on h4, trying to spearhead an attack on the king side, but it turns out your king would be quite a bit weaker on the queen side after simply d takes, bishop takes, and then a5, getting the a pawn rolling down the board, threatening a4, and so on. So instead here, Magnus does go rook to d1, and this turns out to be the strongest move on the board. The point being, the rook is very active on d1, opposing the black queen on d7, and if black ever trades on c4, d takes c4, then you can recapture with the bishop in one go. Bishop takes c4, instead of going, say, bishop g3, then d takes, then bishop takes, wasting a tempo. And now here, the gamble did pay off. Black does take on c4. D takes c4 played in the game. Now bishop takes c4, again recapturing with the bishop in one tempo. And now Magnus has, again, sort of a weird potential attacking position. He may want to go h5, h6 later. He may want to go, I don't know, king f1, king g2, and so on. He's got a lot of ideas here. All right, Gukesh. He gains space on the queen side in the spirit of the semi-Slav. b5, driving back that bishop. Bishop d3, And now here, Gukesh, he continues on the queen side with the move a5. Now, this move looks very attractive. You are threatening a4, but it turns out this is a slight mistake. Instead of a5, the right move is simply knight a6, intending knight to c7 and then knight d5. d5, of course, being the best square for the knight, but the point being, with that isolated pawn on d4, there is no way for a pawn to challenge the knight on the d5 square. Now, instead, a5 played in the game, and the idea again is very simple. He is threatening a4, but here, white has a beautiful attacking idea. It doesn't win on the spot, but there is a very, very dangerous idea right here for white. If you like, pause this video and try to find the best continuation for white in this position. And while you're at it, go and smash that YouTube like button for more videos just like this. All right, the key idea here for white, in the spirit of a lot of queen's gambit positions, is the move bishop b1, the point being if black goes then a4, then you slide your queen back to c2 with the queen in front of the bishop. You are threatening ideas like g4, g5, or bishop g5, at which point you try to remove the defender of h7, that being the knight. If the knight goes, then queen takes h7 would be mate. So overall, bishop b1, intending queen c2 if a4 would be the most dangerous attacking setup, and it's not even that hard to find, so I am a little bit surprised that Magnus did not find it in the game. All right, instead, short castles played, getting his king to safety, and again, the king may go to g2 later in the game. That would be quite a decent square for the king. All right, now here, Gukesh, he punishes the mistake by Magnus. a4 played in the game, driving back the queen. The queen goes to c2, and again, now the bishop would belong on b1 ideally, but there is no easy way to get it to that square. All right, here, Gukesh, he has a few different options, but the best move here is to continue with the alpha 0 a pawn attack. You go a3, driving the pawn all the way down to its final destination. The point being, if you take, then you can recapture with the bishop or the rook, and if you don't take, then black has the permanent wedge on a3 after b3. That would be very, very dangerous, and white loses control of that b4 square. Now instead, knight a6 played in the game, and this turns out to be quite a bit weaker, and there's just one small problem with this move. Of course, Gukesh is threatening knight b4, hitting both the queen and the light squared bishop. If he could win that bishop, that would be a huge accomplishment for his position. But instead here, Magnus, he just plays the very simple move, a3, gaining control of b4, and this highlights the need for black to play a4 on the a3, on the prior move, stopping the a3 move from white. All right, now knight c7 played in the game by Gukesh, a very smart idea, again intending knight to d5, that being the whole point of this knight a6 move played earlier. Knight a6, then c7, then d5, and the knight will be perfectly placed block, hitting that pawn on d5. All right, now here, Magnus, he increased the pressure, knight d4, threatening knight takes, then bishop takes h7 check. So Magnus once again tried to remove the defender of the pawn on h7. And how will Gukesh respond? Well, it turns out this threat is not that dangerous. There are many easy ways to defend. One idea is h6, the other one being knight c d5. The point being, if knight takes, then you just recapture with the other knight. Knight takes f6, and again, h7 would be sufficiently defended. Now, instead here, in the game, Gukesh, he plays the move g6, and this move is very, very strange. I just cannot understand this move. It weakens the dark squares so much on the king side. What was Gukesh thinking? I mean, someone down below, let me know. What was Gukesh thinking right here with this move g6? It does not make any sense to me at all. All right, now, bishop f4, getting that dark squared bishop to a slightly better square and pressuring that knight on c7. Now we have knight c d5, a very obvious move. Now the bishop is under attack. And now here, Magnus, he shows the idea behind bishop f4. He goes bishop to e5. Bishop e5 played in the game, but this move is slightly dubious. It's not really a good square for the bishop. Instead, bishop g5 is the best move here. That is the typical square for the bishop in these lines. Instead, bishop e5 played, and again, the placement of that bishop does not inspire a whole lot of confidence. All right, now here, Gukesh, he can punish this move immediately with a very powerful idea. That idea is knight to h5. The point being, you are threatening f6, the Ben Feingold counterattack. And then if the bishop goes back, either knight can capture it on f4. So overall, knight h5, intending the good old-fashioned Ben Feingold counterattack with the move f6, that would be the strongest way to go forward. Instead, rook fc8 played in the game, a decent square for the rook in general, but again, missing out on that knight h5 idea. All right, now, Magnus, king g2, getting his king off the back rank, potentially setting up h5, rook h1 ideas, trying to open up the h-file. Now, once again here, Gukesh, his best idea is knight h5, again intending f6, but instead here, knight e8 played in the game, and e8 is just such a weaker square for the knight. Gukesh has the same idea. He wants to go f6, but overall, that knight does belong on h5 instead of on e8. All right, now here, Magnus. How should he proceed? Well, it turns out simply h5 is playable. Instead, knight to c5 played in the game, hitting that queen on d7. Now we have bishop takes, then d takes, and then f6, finally driving back that bishop. And now here, both sides, according to the engine, have a roughly level game. This will be very, very heated. All right, now, bishop c3, retreats the bishop, knight g7, rerouting the knight to a better square. Now, bishop e4, pressuring d5, queen to f7, trying to get the queen off that d-file, where it is opposing the white rook on d1. Not a bad idea at all, but here, the GOAT, he is not done. f4, gaining space on the king side, knight f5, rerouting the knight. Now we have rook fe1. Here, Magnus is literally perfectly centralized all his pieces on just beautiful squares here. The only thing left to do, as far as I can tell, is start that alpha 0 pawn attack on the king side. All right, now Gukesh, he defends, rook to e8, and now, sure enough, the move we've been waiting for, h5, trying to blow open the king side. All right, now Gukesh, how should he defend? Well, first of all, the computer says taking on h5 is technically playable. You technically win a pawn, but then, however, it does run into the immediate idea of bishop takes f5, permanently damaging black's pawn structure after e takes f5. The computer says that is actually okay, but I do not like that at all. Beyond that, rook a d8 is playable, or the move played in the game by Gukesh, simply king g7, also getting his king off that back rank, potentially intending rook h8 ideas if he needs it later in the game. All right, now here, the computer finds just a crazy line, starting with the move g4, driving back that knight, and then the pawn sacrifice h6 once the knight moves. That line is insanely complicated. It's very, very strong. If you like, investigating lines all on your own, I would highly recommend investigating g4 followed by h6 here, but that line is just outside the scope of this video. All right, instead, h takes g6 played in the game by the GOAT. Now we have h takes g6, and then bishop takes d5. Very controversial, giving up his bishop for that knight. It wasn't necessary. There were many other good moves. For example, instead here, g4, king g1, queen e2, and here king to f1 are all given by the computer as better alternatives. Instead, bishop takes d5 played. Gukesh does recapture with the e-pawn, e takes d5, and now Magnus, he gets his attack going on the king side with the move g4, driving back that knight. Now, where is the knight going to go? Well, it's not going anywhere yet. In the game, d4 played by Gukesh, taking control of the center. Now here, do you move the bishop or do you take that knight on f5? Do you trade on e8? What's it going to be, the GOAT? In the game, he does go g takes f5, trading off that knight, giving up his bishop on c3. Black does take that, d takes c3, and now we have queen takes c3. All right, the dust has sort of settled a little bit here. The GOAT, Carlsen, he is up a single pawn, that being the extra pawn on the king side, but keep in mind, he has tripled isolated pawns on the f-file. You don't see that every day. Those pawns are as weak as they get. All right, now, rook takes e1, then rook takes, then queen d5, hits that king on g2. So far, the game is relatively level, and now we do head for an endgame here. Queen to f3, queen takes, king takes, and then rook to d8. All right, can Magnus finish Gukesh off in the endgame? Here we go. Rook e7 hits the king. Now here, very importantly, Gukesh, he has to slide his king back closer to the center of the board. King to f8 is the right move here. If you don't do that, you will be in a lot of trouble. And here, Gukesh, he misses it. He plays the move, king to h6. And what the heck is the king doing there? I mean, even if black takes, I don't know, g takes f5 later in the game, he's not going to be able to win anything on the king side. His king is going to be cut off from the rest of the board. And of course, the rook controls the 7th rank. What is that king doing? All right, now, rook e6 threatens both f6 and c6. There's no way to defend. In the game, king g7 played. Another mistake. Instead, g takes f5 is the only consolation move. Instead, king g7. Then we have rook takes c6. Magnus officially has that passed pawn on c6. Things are not looking good. All right, rook d2. Gukesh knows in the endgame with rooks, you must be as active with the rooks as possible. So, rook d2, targeting b2, trying to get potentially a pass pawn of his own on the queen side, but Magnus, he is just too fast here. Rook c7 hits the king h6, again the king being cut off. Now rook to c8, setting up c6, then c7 ideas. All right, now rook takes b2, wins that pawn, c6, rook c2, then c7. Now the threat is simply rook h8, king to g7, then c8 promotes to a queen, rook takes, and Gukesh would lose his rook on the spot. Therefore here, king g7 is forced, guarding both g7 and g8 and h8. All right, now here, in the game, Magnus does win yet another pawn, f takes g6. The point being, if you take that pawn, king takes g6, then again, rook g8 wins on the spot as you do promote that pawn to a queen on c8. Instead here, before play by Gukesh fighting, trying to get a pass pawn of his own. Now a takes b4, then a3. But here Magnus, he is just too fast. Rook to a8, rook takes c7, rook takes a3. And now, of course, Magnus, he is going to be up just too many pawns. King takes g6 played in the game, but now b5. And there is literally no stopping that pawn on the queen side. The king can march down the board to support it. And he also has the extra pawn on the king side. And for that reason here, Gukesh, he simply resigns on the spot to Magnus Carlsen in this game from the 2022 Speed Chess Championships. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash that like button and comment down below what you thought of this game. I would love to hear from you guys. And while you're at it, check out this video right here where Gukesh gets his revenge on Magnus Carlsen, playing an absolutely beautiful game. If you want to see Gukesh, destroy Magnus, check that video out, and I'll see you in the next video.